So what does it take to become a professional arm wrestler? Alrighty, ladies and gents, welcome to another arm wrestling video. In today's video, we're going to be answering the question, what does it take to become a professional arm wrestler? It's an obscure sport, something that is pretty rare amongst strength athletes, but one that is very, very fascinating in its own right. So that's what we're going to be diving deep into today. Okay, so to answer this question today, we're going to be doing a few things. First of all, I'm going to meet with some local arm wrestlers here in Brisbane, Australia that have been in the sport for a varying amount of time. And we're going to ask them how their experience has been so far, how far down the track are they towards their goals, and what they've done to really achieve that. Then, very interestingly, I'm going to be getting on the phone to wait for it. The greatest arm wrestler of all time, none other than Mr. John Brzenk, the man who has dominated the sport for over 4.5 decades at world champion level. No one knows the sport better than John Brzenk, and we're going to get him on the line to answer the question of how do you become a professional arm wrestler. And then finally, I'm going to reflect on my journey. I'm 9 years in, and I'm going to show you exactly where I was at 1 year, 2 year, 5 years, 7 years, and 9 years into the sport to show you the difference in my physicality and the evolution of my conditioning to the sport over that time. So let's go do it. Alrighty, ladies and gents, so with me today are a bunch of arm wrestlers from Brisbane, and we're going to be asking them a bunch of questions about their experience with the sport, how long they've been arm wrestling, what their goals are, and the big question, are they pro level yet, or how close to pro level are they? And anyway, it's going to be some fun. So ladies and gents, joining me now, as you can see, we've got Jamie Barrett. He's only 16 years old, you wouldn't believe it. Ethan Tunstall, how old are you? You're not too old either, are you?
19.
19, okay.
Yep.
And Duruk Atai, how old are you, man?
32.
32. There we go. So we got a bit of an array here. I want to start, gents, with I'll save you for last because I know what your answer is. But what are the goals in arm wrestling for you guys? Where are you guys at? Duruk, let's start with you.
Oh, I don't have any aim to become a champion or anything, but I definitely enjoy the combat sport part of it, the art of just playing the talkative hands, just the dancing on the hand control.
So you love the sport.
I love the sport.
The physical feeling of the sport is awesome. Exactly. You don't really care how high you get. You just want to kick some ass locally.
I'm a professional photographer, so I will never be able to challenge myself to chase for some sort of become an elite athlete. But
And how long have you been pulling for?
I've been pulling for 4 years, and
4 years. Okay.
I just started figuring things out, basically. The first 2 years goes really painful. You learn a lot of things. You figure your top roll. The third year, you figure your fourth year. Yeah.
Nice.
That's when you get ready.
And Ethan, goals?
Goals? Oh, I really want to get to a point where I could win something like WAF Worlds.
So big goals. Big
Yeah,
goals.
yeah.
A WAF Worlds, ladies and gentlemen, if you don't know what that is, that's a World Arm Wrestling Federation title. That's some people say it's the hardest tournament to win on earth. So big goals.
Yeah, big goals.
Next question. How long have you been pulling?
Been pulling for just over 2 years now.
Okay, so we've got 4 years, 2 years. And I'll get back to the next question. I'll save it for later. And then finally, Jamie, I think your goal is the most impressive goal out of anyone's. What's your goal, mate?
I'd like to win the Zloty Tour and become world champion.
You just want to be the guy.
I want to be the guy.
So we got big goals. We got social goals, big goals, and as big as they get goals, pretty much. How long have you been pulling, man?
Just about 1.5 years on the table.
Okay. Yep. And you're 16 years old?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. So there you have it, the context in what we've got here. For those who don't know how long I've been pulling for almost 9 years now. And essentially similar goals to these two. Want to go as high as I can possibly get. Now, then when it comes to the questions about, all right, how do you obtain those goals? What do you guys do in order to chase these goals? Again, I want to start with you, Duruk, because
I love chasing big boys, man. I just love it, honestly. Yeah, I just love putting myself into position where I really have to work hard and stuff.
Yep.
So, yeah.
You are a killer, though, as well. Again, don't underestimate Duruk by any stretch. I mean, you're a savage on the table. So you've been pulling 4 years. You've developed an elbow conditioning level that is really quite impressive. And
good wrists right now. Yeah,
wrist strength.
My hands have gotten really thicker over time in the 4 years. That's like a massive part of it, I think.
Yeah, because I would say that you are. I like to say you're the strongest and most unassuming guy in the Brisbane club relative to how you appear you don't, not that you don't appear strong, but
I know that's
the
how
people
I
you
like
can, the
it,
people
but-
you can beat, you're like, oh, what? you can smash people. So you've developed that because of what style of training? What have you
I
done?
started very weak. That's why. Like when I first came, like literally, I saw your actually video on YouTube. That's when I first actually figured it out. Oh my god, that's when I texted you, and like when I came super weak to the sport, it was so much beneficial for me to work on my technical side of the things before I could, go to gym and add horsepower into it.
Yep.
So I just worked on technique for a long time.
Yep.
I'm just adding some more, like a little gym training, adding more horsepower, but most of my training is on the table, and just rest of the week I'm just rehabbing myself with bands.
And that makes sense at the end of the day, doesn't it? I mean, if we look at boxing as an analogy, if you want to become a good boxer, you're gonna go and box. Aren't you? You're not going to go to the gym and then expect to be able to knock people out. So, how about you guys? Is there any different approach there, or for your physical training?
Oh, quite similar. I like to go 4 to 5 table sessions a week if I can. But I like to have a different focus with each table session.
Okay. And how long does a table session go for if you guys are arm wrestling?
2.5 hours, 3 hours.
2.5 hours of arm wrestling.
Brutal.
Nice. Jamie, yourself, your training methods?
I'll try to get as much table time as possible and as much gym time.
I actually think this guy's the most committed. You catch a train. You spend 6 hours on a train to get to a damn session, don't you?
Yeah. After 2 weeks, it's probably like 50 hours on the
It's
train.
unreal. It's unreal. Your level of commitment is just up there. It's crazy. But so you prioritize table time over gym time?
Yeah, for sure.
You do when you're in the gym. Are they fundamentally based strength things, or are they specific strength things?
Yeah, definitely. All fundamentals, mostly cupping and pronation. And your fingers develop with that as you're training it.
Yep. Okay, so for viewers at home, when we say fundamentals, we're talking about things like back pressure, wrist flexion, pronation, and side pressure. Okay, because a lot of people would think that fundamentals are bench press, squat, deadlift, wouldn't they? I know that.
That's
In a different
definitely
sense.
fault.
This is an arm wrestling channel after all, so it's all good. But so in terms of where you guys think you're at on your journey, so 4 years in, 2 years in, a year and a half in, are you tracking well?
I'm doing all right. I'm the current Queensland State second place at both arms, pretty much. And we know who the first place is. I mean, Sam Burnett. It's like when you're second place in this Queensland State, it's pretty much like first place in my eyes. He wiped out the whole class, like super heavyweights and everything.
Yep.
Yeah,
So given where you're at
I'm doing
for your
all right.
goals, you're kicking ass.
Well, I've been waiting because of pandemic, kind of get in the way. But yeah, I've been chasing some guys I just haven't had a chance to pull with.
Nice. And how about you guys? The biggest goals here. How do you feel you're progressing?
Well, in technique sense, I feel like I'm progressing all right, but I'm where Dorak was. I'm still weak. So that's a big focus.
It does take a long time to get the strength and the conditioning, doesn't it? At the end of the day. How about you, Jamie? Where are you at in terms of the conditioning level?
I think my elbow's really, really good. I've injured it, however. I think my wrist flexion's good. I think my fingers are good. I need more pronation and back pressure.
Yep. Sure. Well, to anyone who hasn't experienced the sport before, would explain what this sport is like in terms of how physically painful it is to actually develop the conditioning. And to someone who's never gripped an arm wrestler before, I think that they're surprised the first time they ever grip an arm wrestler at how rigid an arm wrestler's elbow feels. So talk about that journey for a bit. What's your experiences?
Well, I get a lot of teachers from school who, deadlift 300 kilos and bench press 200, and I arm wrestle, and they're like, what the?
So you're Australia's, I think, highest ranked high school student, aren't you?
Yeah, and I challenge anybody that thinks I'm not.
There we go. Come and seek out Jamie Barrett, and he will put you in your place. I assure you. My buddy's on Jamie if you're in high school. So, you guys, have you spent much time? Our social groups are among arm wrestlers. Have any of you guys happened to group up with a non-arm wrestler just casually?
Yeah. I mean, it's like the thing, when I walk into a pub or something, like I'm just looking at the crowd. I'm like, Bring me the biggest bikey guy you got in there. It's like, no problem. Just because they just don't know any hand control, they don't know how to post, they just don't know.
And they don't have
It's easy.
the conditioning in the very little specific
Absolutely.
things that matter most. You know? Good
No
stuff. Now,
chance.
last question I've got. How often do you guys think about arm wrestling?
24/7.
I knew
From
you
the
were
minute
going
I
to say
wake up
that.
to the minute I go to sleep. I probably can't sleep because I'm thinking about it so much.
Yeah, you're obsessed with developing that next. What am I missing? Next? What's the most essential thing I need next? Nice. You guys?
Too much. I must look
Too
like a
much?
psycho on public transport, just
You're sitting there.
sitting there thinking about the setup and just
wonder what's going on.
Look at that, what a creep.
what's he doing? What's he doing?
Cool. And Doruk,
To a point, like literally, it's one of those topics where my wife complains. You know, you
Yeah.
watch so much YouTube and arm wrestling. She knows all about Devon and John and obviously you guys and all. She's been coming to training. She's actually enjoying it.
she's getting the bug.
Like honestly, this arm wrestling, I started it because we were in a long-term caravanning with my wife, and I needed some boys' time basically. And that's when I get into arm wrestling, and I really got that sort of feedback as well from arm wrestling community. But now my wife is actually catching up with other arm wrestlers,
Yeah, nice.
wives and stuff. So
There
that's
you go.
kind of adding into like a nice friendship.
Well, it is one of the most amazing social groups I've ever been part of. So, anyway, lads, thank you so much for sharing with me your experiences among arm wrestlers. I hope you all reach your goals, and I can't wait to watch it all unfold.
Sounds good. Thank you.
All right, now that we've heard from some arm wrestlers here in Brisbane, Australia, it's time to call the GOAT. It's time to call John Brzenk and get him on the line to answer all of the best questions. Alrighty, ladies and gents, as you can see, we have, as mentioned, John Brzenk on the line via Zoom. John is the greatest arm wrestler of all time. John, welcome. How are you, man?
Good, Ryan. How you doing?
I'm doing very well. John, as you know, the reason we're here today is to answer the question, what does it take to become a professional arm wrestler? Now, of course, you've been through the complete journey of novice to amateur to pro to elite to the GOAT. How long? I want to know, how long did it take you to transition through all of those different phases?
Well, my story is probably different than most arm wrestlers that pursue the sport. I started when I was 12, 13 years old, looking up to my dad. And at that point, he just realizes the sport existed. And I kind of watched him and pulled with two arms with him for a few of those years too. 13, 14. In fact, I actually broke my arm wrestling a buddy of his at 13 years old. So my beginnings were before I was an actual adult. So, and then I took like a 2-3 year break. Long story, but I moved out west to Utah, lived with my mother. They were split at the time, and really didn't do much arm wrestling at all until 16, 17 years old when I moved back to Illinois and took up the sport again. And at that point, I think maybe a year and a half, 2 years, I had, I was competitive on the world stage already, believe it or not. So it didn't take long. I think I
Damn you, John.
won.
Damn you.
I started winning and beating notable arm wrestlers at a very, very young age, 18, 19. I'm sure.
Okay, so about 3 weeks in, you had reached amateur level.
Yeah, pro level. But I was conditioned, as like I said, at such a young age. So I think I kind of seasoned myself or grew up and took those really quick advances as being just a very, very young teenager. So it was kind of unfair, I think.
So your foundation at 12, 13 years old, you gripped your dad and your brother. How often would you grip up and get tension through the elbow?
Well, not so much my brother, but I clearly remember arm wrestling on a regular basis in 7th grade, 8th grade. So junior high school, they had a roll call. So it was like a 5-10 minute thing where you would go to a classroom to basically let the teachers know that you were there for the day. And there was probably, 3 or 4 of the strongest kids at that time were in my homeroom class. So and it was broken up by alphabet. So A, B, C. I mean, I think the ABCs were in this particular class. And we just were allowed to kill time or do whatever we wanted to do while the teacher basically did this roll call thing. and it must have been longer than just 5 minutes. It must have been about 15, 20 minutes. And we would arm wrestle. I mean, we would arm wrestle every single day. It wasn't anything professional. It wasn't anything organized. Didn't really know the rules. We'd just go across to, the tabletops, the classroom tabletops. So even with that, I think I was strengthening myself to become an arm wrestler 3-4 years later when I got in my late teens.
Nice. So when you did get into your late teens and you started to be competitive on the world stage, what do you think it was that took you from being, let's call it an entry-level world arm wrestler to being the number one ranked in the world? What was that transition like?
Just experience. I mean, I would start just going to local tournaments with my dad. So I started, somewhat small. I mean, it was, I consider that professional arm wrestlers because there was decent arm wrestlers in the Chicago area. But we would just go to small tournaments. There would happen to be a guy that promoted the sport that was just a few cities away that would normally have an arm wrestling tournament at some small bar almost once a week. And that was the thing for my dad and I to do, is head out to that bar and go arm wrestle. So, but then it progressed to a little bit bigger tournaments. So my dad would hear about a tournament that was, 300-400 miles away, and we would jump in the car and go do it. And pretty soon it got to the point where it was like, okay, I'm beating these guys. Let's give it a test. Let's go out to Vegas or go out to Reno and start hitting against some of the bigger guys. And my dad knew who these guys were because he was more in touch and competing and making it to some of the bigger tournaments before I actually became good enough where I was beating him. And it's like, hey, Dad, I should go with you to see if I can, take on these guys. So
well, that's always an interesting question. How high ranked were you in the world when your dad could still beat you? I love that question.
Oh yeah, no. Well, there was a lot of guys. I mean, yeah, we'd go to tournaments and guys would beat my dad and I would beat them. And then I would have, the way the bracketing was, I would face my dad somehow and it would be a really tough match. And there was a lot of times that he would hang me up. I don't think he did the King's move, but it was kind of like that situation. He knew there was a sticking point that I had that I would blast through most people, and he was able to stop me, and he would laugh at me and say, can't beat the old man still. And, it played with my head, I guess, probably a little bit, but yeah, no, there was definitely a time span there of a year or so that he was still, I didn't like arm wrestling against him because he knew exactly who I was, what I was, and what I could do and what I couldn't do.
For sure. And John, am I correct in saying that you didn't spend really any time essentially in the gym? It was all done arm wrestling.
My best friend in high school, his dad opened up a Nautilus gym, and he would motivate me to work out, but it was the general, Nautilus workout. It wasn't. I think the theory at that time, and I'm not even sure if it's a good theory anymore, but it was handle as much weight as you can handle for one set of reps of between 8 and 12, and that's what we do. We just go through the machines and that, but that probably only lasted a couple of years. I never did anything specifically for arm wrestling. Or outside where, free weights and bench and stuff like that. So yeah, no, very, very little weight training. I'm not, organized, structured, disciplined weight training. It was never there. But my dad always had weights in a back room that I kind of toyed with every once in a while. So I can't say that I never lifted weights, but I wasn't a really serious, dedicated weightlifter.
So in terms of the mental side of becoming an elite arm wrestler, were you driven to discover technique, or did that just naturally flow from your experience, or where were you at mentally?
Yeah, it was a progression. I mean, the guys that I would arm wrestler, I would try to figure out the best approach at beating them, and a lot of the top guys in the area that I initially started practicing with were always way stronger than me inside. I had a larger hand than most, a stronger hand than most, and had that explosivity of a kid that was fairly explosive. I was a sprinter. So my approach and my key to victory against most of these bigger, larger adults were the ready go. I was the European of the day in the 80s. I would rely on the ready go, flash, blast. I beat many guys that afterwards we'd pull, and if I let them get any traction at all or start slowly at all, they were all stronger than me, but they couldn't they couldn't stop the ready go.
Awesome. So you really just identified for yourself the best strategy for your physical strengths, and you set a plan for each.
And I evolved from that because I had to. There were guys out there that possessed a bigger, stronger hand, a better top roll than I did. So in the early, late teen years, I'll bring Johnny Walker's name up as an example. He just was not top rollable. I mean, he would shut me down with the top roll. So I eventually had to work on being more dominant and stronger in the inside pull. And it is not something that I would look to do very often, but there were, for a few of the guys out there, I needed to have it. So I progressed into that.
Awesome.
Getting that.
Well, John, we're keeping it short and sweet. If you had to wrap it up for someone who's new to the sport, just interested, they've got that fire burning that they want to be an arm wrestler, what would you say as a generalized piece of direction? What would you give them to set them on the right path to become a professional?
Well, they got to have the desire, and they also have to have the patience, because arm wrestling is a little different than weightlifting. It's not going to happen right away. You're not going to see a lot of the gains right away like you will lifting in the gym. So it's something that you have to really love, enjoy doing, and keep telling yourself that this hard work that I'm doing right now is going to eventually pay off in a year or 2 years or 3 years, because that's what it takes. I mean, the tendons take a long time to really strengthen and develop. And it's a big hurdle to get through, because it's painful. I mean, arm wrestling is unnatural, and you'll have a hard time combing your hair for many months before you develop that strength where that's not such a problem anymore.
And of course, ladies and gentlemen, remember that John, as John mentioned earlier, he did break his arm in the very beginnings of his journey, and yet here he is as the GOAT. So stick with it. Awesome, John. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to share this with me today and the audience today. I really appreciate it, and congratulations on all that you've done in the sport and continue to do in the sport. So thank you very much.
My pleasure, Ryan. Anytime.
So we've heard from John, and it was quite the contrast to the experience of the Australian arm wrestlers. But given that John's the GOAT, that's fair enough. Now, I want to bring you into my world. I'm 9 years into the sport effectively now, and the goal of becoming a genuine world champion level arm wrestler has been firm within me for a long time. So I wanted to share with you kind of my evolution. So I started the sport in 2013, and as you can see here in this footage, I was skinny. I wasn't particularly strong. I'd come from a military background, but I had a parachuting accident, so I was kind of wasted away, and I was no longer a physical sort of athlete at the time. But I started pretty weak. I started around that 84 kilos, kind of skinny and fat. But nevertheless, at the same time, I was still quite competitive among other novice arm wrestlers of the same level. And so I had success early on at the novice level. If we now skip forward to 2 years in, this is me at the Arm Wars International Classic. It's kind of a professional sense, but my standard wasn't yet professional, even though it was a professionally presented moment for me. My level still wasn't professional, but you can see by the way I'm moving that it's pretty extreme. I'm willing to put my elbow on the line, and from there, I was starting my journey into becoming conditioned to the sport, truly. If we fast forward now to 2017, okay, in between 2014 and 2017, I won a number of national titles at my weight category, but I still wasn't yet professional. 2017 came up, and I took on a gentleman named Justin Bishop. He was a genuine professional arm wrestler, and he was my entry into becoming a professional arm wrestler myself. Justin beat me 6-0 this day, but it gave me that taste of what it is to be a professional arm wrestler. And it would be from there forward that I would consider myself a professional standard arm wrestler. Now, in 2019, I had a really big year. I went to Canada and beat a lot of their best arm wrestlers, and most notably Evan Burgoyne, which you can see here. Evan was a super heavyweight arm wrestler. He was ranked like 3rd in Ontario among super heavyweights, with only Devin Larratt above him and maybe Ian Carnegie. And And it was a great match. It was like a breakout match for me where I became more recognized as a solid level pro within the sport of arm wrestling. The same year, I went on and beat the USA's Dallas Langston, who, as you can see here in action, he's a beast. But he was ranked 4th in the USA for 210 pounds, which is about my body weight. And I beat him quite convincingly. I then went on to my WAL debut up against Alan Guerra, who's the #1 arm wrestler in Mexico. And I got a victory over him 3-1 as well. COVID kind of got in the way a bit, but opportunities from then, my final opportunity internationally was to pull Chance Shaw, who is Florida's super heavyweight champ. You can see me up against Chance here. I got the victory 4-2 over Chance that day, and that was a moment where a lot of people didn't expect my level to be that high. Since then, COVID crushed every opportunity I've had, and I've only really had the opportunity to pull it in Australia. I formally took the #1 rank in Australia by beating Ryan the Milkman Scott, who had been the overall #1 champ for quite some time. I put in a really good performance against him and took that #1 rank in Australia, and then lost the #1 rank, as you can see in my most recent match, which was against Lachlan Adair. Too big, too strong, too powerful, too whatever you want to call it. But that there is my journey. Now, in terms of the conditioning, you could probably see as those videos went by, you could see the physicality changing. You could see my weight going up. You could see the definition of my forearm going up. You could see everything getting bigger and stronger throughout that period of time. For me, despite what John Brzenk said, which it took him 1.5 years to get to the top rank in the world, okay, for me it took 4 years. I went from 2013 through to 2017 to get from novice to pro. And that was entry-level pro when I pulled Justin Bishop that day. Another year or two went by before I became a decent level pro and started winning matches. And here where I am now, some 9 years later, I'm overall ranked #2 in Australia, only behind Lachlan Adair, who's a super heavyweight. But I did get, for a moment in time, to touch that #1 rank by beating Ryan Scott. And yeah, so that's been my journey. Quite different to John's, quite different to the guys so far that we interviewed from Brisbane, but nevertheless, very interesting. Alrighty guys, so there you have it. That's kind of what it takes to become a professional arm wrestler. It's definitely an obscure strength sport. Your body is not really meant to be strong in that direction. Our bodies are meant to be strong in linear planes. In arm wrestling, we're asking ourselves to go sideways, against the grain of what our connective tissue wants to do. So it's very real when I say that it takes a long time. As John mentioned, it takes years to get through the conditioning pains that come with arm wrestling because of its obscure nature. And if you've never arm wrestled a pro arm wrestler before, be prepared to get a surprise as to how much they feel like a brick wall. And you might even have stronger biceps than them. You might have a bigger bench, you might have stronger everything in a fundamental sense. But because they have the strength of their connective tissue and they become conditioned to these obscure and yet very valuable strengths, they feel like an absolute brick wall. So all in all, if we exclude the John Brzenks of the world, it takes about, in my experience, 4 to 5 years to become a professional arm wrestler. I'm still pursuing the elite level. I'm 9 years in, I'm not yet elite. And what I consider elite is just the pointy end of the pro levels, the world champions, the guys on the podium at the biggest tournaments in the world. So that, for me, is still a question yet to be answered, but one I hope to be able to give to you sometime soon in the future. Alrighty guys, thank you so much for joining me on this video. Once again, I would like to express my gratitude and also get you to hit the like button for me. Leave us a comment below about your experience in pursuing professional arm wrestling. Where are you at in the journey? Are you chasing it? Are you obsessed with it like Jamie Barrett is? There's so much in this sport. But anyway, guys, leave us a like, a comment, hit share if you thought it was awesome, and make sure you hit that subscribe button for me, and I'll see you again next time.
Yes, that's a man!